Ben Ferguson,
Yes.
tell us about these languages. Where did all these place names come from?
Some for Choctaw, some from Muskogee Creek, some from Hitchity Creek, and some are unknown. And one real enigma is the Tallapoosa River, a straight-out, unadulterated Choctaw word for crushed rock, which is their word for sand. And that is well up into the old creek country. Now, hugging the coast and the coastal lowlands, you'll find Choctaw words all the way to the Apalachicola. Okaloosa is one of them that means black water, like that. And once you got inland, that's where you started running into Muskogee Creek words. And words like Wetumpka, noisy water, which before the dams was in, there were falls there. Weewahitchka, that's a creek word brought into West Florida, means water view or water eyes, so it was kind of an overlook for water. In Choctaw, the word for water was oka, like that. In Creek, it was we or weewa. It was we when it was with another word, like Wetumpka or we lusty, that's yellow water or whatever. I'm sorry, no, we lusty is black water. We lana is a yellow water. But on the other hand, you can get it like the Ochlockonee over in around Tallahassee area. That's the Hitchity Creek. And it's kind of unusual. Their word for water was more like the Choctaw. It was Okie instead of Oka. Oka, Okefenokee, Okeechobee. That was Hitchity Creek words brought in the Peninsula, Florida, which Seminole is nothing but a creek that drifted out of Georgia. And after the Red Stick War, you started getting Muskogee elements.
Didn't the Hitchity come from further north too, up around Gadsden or somewhere?
No, the Hitchity with Georgia Creek come from the Oconee River area. The first bunch, Cowkeeper, they want the first to repopulate Florida. Actually, the Seminoles' ancestors helped the English exterminate the native Florida Indians, but they've been enemies since pre-Columbian times. And when, let me see, Cowkeeper, I think, his bunch, they were allied with the English during the border wars, and in 1830-something, they allied with the English trying to drive the Spanish completely out of Florida. But they held up in San Augustine. They couldn't breach the old fort. The Indian allies ravaged the back country.
Are you saying the 1730s?
1730.
Not 1830.
Not 1830. And that was when they noticed the complete human vacuum in Florida, and whole Hitchity Creek towns moved down into Florida. First settling in that Alachua Savannah, because it's not common knowledge, but they were big into cattle at the time. And up until the 70s, I know for sure on the Brighton Reservation in South Florida, the reservation north of Okeechobee, they were still referred to as cow creeks, like that. And anyhow, the names are tangled up, and something you always have to keep in the back of your mind when you're going with the first logged in names. Who did they have for the guides? In southwest Louisiana, you run into a lot of that. The French would have Choctaw guides and would be given a derivation of the names of the places in Choctaw. And actually, it could have been Chittimacha or Takapaw area. But being the French, the Choctaw guides are with the French, they'd call their name for it. So sometimes it can be misleading as to which one to use.
So the name Shamuckla, you think, is another one that's a strange one to try to pull out, but it seems to come out of Choctaw?
It seems to, but they're not sure. Others say it's Muskogee, and it's loosely translated to bow one's knee, or bow one's head, or bow one's knees. In other words, get in a prayer position. And it could be from the Shamuckla Spring there. It could have been sacred, maybe sacred to all of them. But that's speculation. Like that. How much of the word had been whittled down over the centuries, we'll never know. If it could have went from Choctaw to Creek, or Creek to Choctaw, and then into Spanish, and then into English, they could have a pretty good bit of trimming on the word.
Like you were saying, that Choctaw pretty much held the coastal areas
They seem to have
up till the Spanish arrival.
Right. It seems to, in the tidewater area, to the Apalachicola.
The creeks were much further north, And all of them were basically rebuilding for their civilizations after the devastation of disease from the Spanish.
You're right, disease was a good portion of the devastation, but on the other hand, somebody's recently made an excellent case getting all the old Spanish records together. Spanish were meticulous record keepers like that, about the before, and then 100 years later when they come back, century and a half later after De Soto, it seems like the reason the Mississippian period, with their mounds and their hierarchy, that the place has gotten abandoned, was all of a sudden, here comes these aliens with firearms, horses, metal clothes, which was armor, and all of a sudden the shamans, the chiefs and all that were held as semi-gods lost their status, you might say. And so the huge towns are just gradually abandoned. Between that and the disease, it completely altered.
And they were rebuilding their populations for the next 200 years when the Creek Wars finally came into existence, 200, 250 years later.
Right. And I'm convinced, this is just opinion, that the reason Creeks and Choctaws and all survived, that was the ones that got through the European disease that was spread among them.
Well, they intermarried heavily.
Right.
Which gave them the genetic marker to...
Right, but I mean, when they first made what I call heavy contact after De Soto and Narvaez, the ones that were left by 1700 was able to resist the European diseases. And then scattering them out like that, you probably had less of a chance of inbreeding, which doesn't sound like much with modern medicine, but that can be devastating in a primitive society.
And we're at the burnt corn site. Now that's an English name, burnt corn, but it goes back to an Indian name, doesn't it?
No, burnt corn, there's several things, but the one that's mainly accepted is due to the trading post. The reason this bunch was bushwhacked here by the Tensaw militia was because on their way down to Pensacola to get the powder and lead and the guns, they knocked off a trading post, which is about due east of where Monroeville is now, the upper head of Burnt Corn Creek here. That's where all the creeks head up. The trading post there had a big whiskey still. Jim's Cornell's ran it. And from throwing the mash out after it was run off, it got the name of Burnt Corn. Now, when they were coming down, Cornell's himself a mixed blood, like many on both sides, many of the creeks on both sides. He sided with the Americans, so they burnt the trading post down. He wasn't there. They took his wife, and I don't think for a comfort girl, I think more as a maid and more as a hostage if they got attacked again. There was an older black slave head there, which Creek had a fair number of them, but the reason they figured they didn't take him, they beat him up and left him. He was too old to get any money for him down in Pensacola. So that's where they got alerted that something was afoot. And when they made it to Pensacola, they Tensaw bunch had spies down there, noticed how they were getting the powder and lead like that. And when they were heading back with it, they come up and crossed the Burnt Corn. Now to cross Burnt Corn Creek with pack horses, you didn't do it just any place. One reason, the sides of the creek, not the creek run itself, but the bottom land on it, is real steep. A human can get up it without any trouble, but a horse, especially loaded down, there was few places they could cross it. And they knew they would be at the crossing there because it sloped way down on one side, zigzags up the other. And that's why they were able to know from their tracks that they were going to cross.
And this is all taking place about July 1813, right?
July 27th, yeah. That's when the militia whacked them there and ran them off. 200
years ago from, what is today?
27th.
Oh my, 200 years ago exactly.
And, that's when they did get all the powder and lead. The Indians lost all of that, but they went back to Pensacola and got more.
But the Spanish made some money off that trade, right?
They made money. See, the English, well, apparently the English were going to finance it. Now, it's only been the past 30 years they've been consolidating a lot of this information. But they've lately come up that the first town to be hit during the Creek War was over on the Georgia line, McIntosh's town. The Tal, I can't say Talafra or something, the Acorn town. McIntosh was a heavily pro-American like that. And the reason they changed their mind and decided to hit the Tensaw Town area, which was Fort Mims, Fort Stoddard, Fort St. Phil across the river, was because of the bushwhacking at Burnt Corn. And so we go down there and teach that bunch of lessons like that. And if I'm of the opinion, had it not been for Fort Mims, the Mississippi Valley, all the way to the Pacific, might not be American nowadays.
The British
The
would
New
have got it.
Englanders were against the war. The British had already taken areas in Michigan like that. Ohio, southern Ohio Valley was not secure. The choke point of the mouth of the Mississippi River was New Orleans. And there's evidence come up that the Indians were supposed to hit the southern frontier to coincide around the time of the Battle of New Orleans. But the Creeks in the Tensaw district, when they hit Fort Mims, jumped the gun. And if it would have been a Mexican standoff, like across the river at Fort St. Phil, 2 killed, I think, was in the fort, and that was all. The word wouldn't have got but a few miles away what happened. But they wiped out the fort. Accounts say as many as 500, even if it was half that, it'd be devastating. It spread terror not just through the southeast, but all through the U.S. Jackson had no trouble getting up a militia, as did Claiborne in Mississippi and Floyd in Georgia. And from Jackson chasing the Creeks down for a year, he had a formidable army honed up, well disciplined and knowing what to do. And happened to be at Fort Boyer, which is Fort Morgan now, when Lafitte got word to Governor Claiborne in Louisiana that the British had propositioned him, to get in the bayous and the back doors of New Orleans. Lafitte went straight to Claiborne, and Claiborne to Jackson, and Claiborne also to President Madison, I believe it was, at the time. Yeah, Madison. And that's when they got word, hasten your army to New Orleans. And they were able to counter-move. So if it hadn't have been for the wipeout at Fort Mims, Jackson would have never had that force. There's no way in a month's time he could have got an army that size.
And if it hadn't been for the skirmish at Burnt Corn, Fort Mims wouldn't have been a target in the first place.
Exactly.
So this is great information. I'm going to stop it here. Thank you very much. This is Ben.
It's for one of a nail, a shoe was lost. For one of a shoe, the horse was lost. For one of a horse, a rider was lost. For one of a rider, the battle was lost. For one of a battle, a war was lost. The war was lost, we lost our tail, all for one of a horseshoe nail. And Burnt Corn.
That could be a poem.
Yep.
Almost.
I'm thinking it is.
Anyway, here we are at Brewton, Alabama, the 200 years after the Battle of Burnt Corn. We're on the creek of Burnt Corn here, a little south of where the actual battle took place.
About 10 miles, I think.
But the general geography and everything. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And we'll close it off here. Thank you very much. And we'll continue later.